Hey guys, what's happening? So real quick, for this video I want to talk about both the Avengers Endgame Prelude that came out this month, and it's part 1 of a 3-part series, with part 2 releasing in January and 3 I believe in February. But also along with that, I wanted to get into the new Titan Consumed, Thanos Titan Consumed, which was released by Marvel Studios, and to be honest, between the two, I really wish that Titan Consumed was the one that was released as a comic, or perhaps still the unabridged novel, maybe even an abridged graphic novel alongside with it. But either way, I wanted to talk about both of those for a little bit while adding my 2 cents along with that, of course. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so first and foremost, starting with talks about the Prelude, which really gives us the least information of the two, because the visuals and the dialogue isn't exactly like the film, but it's more like an abridged version of what happened in Avengers Infinity War. And this isn't necessarily anything new, because the majority of the preludes that we've seen about the previous Marvel films, they follow this same pattern. And eventually, within one of the issues in the series, you'll get a little bit of extra information, but for the most part, it's a summary and a montage of the previous films. And with it being abridged, there are some rather important details left out, more so than your critical information being put in. Like for example, Heimdall praying to the Allfathers, asking that they allow the dark magic to flow through his sword Hofun to flow through him one last time.
Allfathers, let the dark magic flow through me one last time.
Which on the surface may seem like a small detail to leave out, but it's pretty important considering that the sword was made in Nidavellir and also capable of accessing the Bifrost, much like Stormbreaker, which we've seen access the Bifrost later on in the film, which was much like Odin's spear Gungnir, which we had seen access the Bifrost in the first Thor film. And this is all possible because all these weapons are constructed to some extent with a portion of Uru metal that not only is difficult to compromise, but unlike other metals in the Marvel universe, it's able to contain magic very well. And in the case of all 3 of these, dark magic, which is a small thing to nitpick, but in my opinion, it's one of those things that's really important. And another thing that I want to mention about it is that between the fight with the Hulk and Thanos, in the Prelude, unlike the film, we see the Power Stone on the Infinity Gauntlet being illuminated, which usually only happens if that stone is being put in use. So with going back and reading this, it begs the question, did Thanos use the Power Stone in order to defeat the Hulk? And whether he did or didn't, will we get a definitive answer in Avengers Endgame? And real quick, I want to know what you guys think down in the comments about that specifically. And matter of fact, I got a poll right here in the corner. Just let me know what you think, either if he did or didn't. And then after that, you can elaborate in the comments. We might even take it over to the community section. But aside from the Endgame prequel that really starts at the beginning of the film and ends around the time that we get Scarlet Witch defending Vision before Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight, like just before Captain America shows up, with Falcon and Black Widow. As I mentioned before, it's mainly a reenactment of the film, and there's little things to kind of pick at here and there, and as they come out, I'll continue to keep you guys posted. But from here, I'd rather jump over to the Thanos Titan Consumed novel and talk a bit about some of the things we learned here, because as far as extra information, this is where it's at, because it's about 44 chapters, all about Thanos, and there's been mixed opinions on whether it's 100% canon, but with it being written before Avengers Infinity War and it lining up with all the films so far, in addition to Barry Lyga working closely with Marvel Studios who released this book anyway, it kind of feel like it is. But there's a lot in this book that tells us about Thanos, because it's a crazy origin narrative that starts from his birth and follows him through his childhood, where he started walking when he was like 6 months old, and his first words was on his first birthday because he refused to speak until he can form a full sentence, which is crazy. But it follows him through there all the way up to the moment that we seen in the post credit of Age of Ultron, where he grabs the gauntlet and says, fine, I'll do it myself. But it also elaborates on his early life and showing us his different plans that he had in mind to save Titan, and how when they considered him mad and exiled him from Titan, he originally set his course for the Kree world Hala, but when his ship was pulled away by a black hole, that just dominoed a bunch of different events. And originally he wanted to go to Hala to figure figure out a way to go back and help Titan, but after being taken off course and saved by another ship called the Golden Birth, he had been taken prisoner by Lord Robo, and that just pulled him further away from Hala. But after escaping there and becoming close friends with another prisoner named Cha Rhaegor, and from there they eventually went on to discover the home of the Chitauri, to whom at this point were much more primitive than what we'd seen in the first Avengers film, and they were mainly a race that operated off of a hive mind, but he had seen their potential not only in their obedience, but also because of the physical adaptations they had made to survive in their harsh, cold home world. But going there and seeing the Chitauri and seeing the Leviathans for the first time, because for Thanos this was the first time he had been out in space and seeing different worlds, aside from being a prisoner. But when he came here and he met the Other for the first time, who we had also seen in the first Avengers film, and the last we seen him was in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1, but when Thanos met him on the Chitauri home world, he was just different. He could speak for himself, he could think for himself, which is why he referred to himself as the Other, setting himself apart from the other Chitauri. But it was after meeting the Other where the Other had suggested to Thanos that he should lead the Chitauri, and it's not long after then where Thanos did exactly that. And it was also on the Chitauri home world where Thanos helped with the genetics to actually improve the army, sampling even his own genetics for the soldiers, in addition to using them to train himself to fight, as well as designing his own armor while he was there. But as far as some of the gems that were in this book that I felt like are kind of pushing forward or peeking into Avengers Endgame, that would also start on the Chitauri homeworld as well, because it's here where Thanos would find out years later that Titan had finally perished like he predicted, and it's also where he began his crusade to save individual worlds who were soon to perish much like Titan. And so Cha Rhaegor, who had been his friend from the time he was a prisoner, he had mentioned to Thanos talks about the Reality Stone and it being in Asgard, and at this point they already had their mix up with like 3 Asgardians before they had got to the Chitauri homeworld, which wasn't the smoothest experience by far. But after discovering the Chitauri, who he later upgraded to being Outriders, he eventually figured out that going to these different planets one at a time and proposing to wipe out half their population for them in order to save them not only was not going well with each planet, with everybody saying no, and then he would just kill off the whole population in its entirety, but after discovering this wouldn't work and along the way recruiting those who did agree with them on those planets, and those who did agree with them, they would become the children of Thanos. And at this time, with him having his Chitauri, having the Outriders, having the children of Thanos building up, he still knew that this was too slow a process and he can only save so many worlds at one time. And so because he initially thought of the whole idea of this Infinity Stone being able to warp reality, at first he thought it was just a fairy tale, but he started to consider it at this point where he realized that his resources can only reach so many planets. It was at this point when the Other suggested to Thanos that he go see the lore speaker. And so the lore speaker, who for one wasn't that easy to get to, but also that was because he had been exiled, and the specific reasons why Thanos wouldn't find out until he went to speak to him for himself. But the Other has suggested for Thanos to go see the lore teller because it is said that he possesses a great deal of wisdom, he doesn't forget anything, but when he recalls memories he has to tell them in the form of a story. But when Thanos goes to see the lore teller, and mainly with the objective of going to him and finding out how to get into Asgard and how to get to the Reality Stone, this is where Thanos pretty much learns everything he knew about Infinity Stones, period. Because this is where he discovers that there's more than one Infinity Stone, that there's actually 6. This is where he finds out what color each stone is and what powers they have. And this is where he gets the location of most of the stones. But also, while he's here, the lore teller, whose health is diminishing, controls Thanos' mind, keeping him still because he plans to put his consciousness within Thanos' body. And it's at this time that the lore teller actually has the same staff that we had seen Loki use in the first Avengers film. And when he does this to Thanos, this is when Thanos starts to believe, okay, these stones are actually a real thing. But this plan isn't long lived out because the lore teller spends much of his time testing out the Mind Stone because he's been exiled and he has nobody to test it on until Thanos came. But it isn't much longer before Gamora and Nebula come in to save Thanos, and Gamora chops off the head of the lore teller. Thanos keeps it so he can explore his mind later and do experiments with it as well. And mainly because the lore teller was so intelligent. But it was mainly here where Thanos got the idea of collecting all the Infinity Stones, because after finding out about Titan actually being destroyed, and that motivating him to go on his crusade, and then after his crusade only reaching but so many worlds, and him using that motivation to entertain the thought or the idea of the Infinity Stones, that's what eventually brought him to actually finding one. But while he was speaking with the Lore Teller gave him a bit of a heed or a warning to those who had wielded the stones, referring to the Celestials and the others who he left unnamed, but he mentioned that they all watched from afar, keeping an eye on the Infinity Stones, mainly because of their power and their potential. And I couldn't help but to think about in the comics where in Marvel The End, I think it was, which is like your follow-up to the Infinity Gauntlet series, and with the talks from Marvel Studios about there being a bigger threat, like this is exactly where my mind goes first, especially because of here at one point we pick up with Thanos on the farm chilling out, maxing, relaxing, all cool, and it's here where he's confronted by Eternity, which I'm not gonna front, it would be pretty cool to see in Avengers 4. And I'm not so much saying that it's gonna play out the exact same way as it did in the comic, but if we got Eternity who popped up on Thanos on this planet, which I believe in the films they're calling Titan 2, but if Eternity shows up here in Avengers Endgame, destroys the planet, which does none other than just piss Thanos off, and as a result Thanos uses the gauntlet and probably the time stone to turn back the damage or whatever, because he was limping quite a bit in the Endgame trailer. But if this gives us a battle between Thanos and Eternity where Thanos wins, which as a result gets the Living Tribunal involved, Infinity even jumps in, this could get pretty crazy. And I know you guys are probably thinking like, man, that's a lot to happen in one movie, but hey, it's a 3-hour movie, and not just is it a 3-hour movie, but it's a 3-hour movie that doesn't need any build up. Like they can really spend little to no time catching everybody up with what happened because everybody has seen Avengers Infinity War. At least I hope you have. And if you haven't, man, I don't even know what to tell you, do it yourself. But either way, that'll do it for this one, guys. But if you haven't already, definitely check out Thanos Titan Consumed. It's definitely a good read, and it's also put in my mind the whole idea of either Eternity or the Living Tribunal, and possibly even Infinity showing up at some point in Avengers Endgame and taking the stakes to a whole nother level. But don't forget, let me know your thoughts about the prequel as well, as far as Thanos using the Power Stone in the film, because once again I got a poll somewhere around the 2-minute 30-second mark on this video, so let me know. But that'll do it for this one, guys, and I'll catch you on the next one. Alright, later.